Midnight's Shroud. The ferry's engine coughed to life one final time before dying completely, leaving Detective Silas Crane stranded on the rotting dock of Raven's Reach. The island stretched before him like a dying beast, its once proud Victorian buildings now sagging under decades of salt air and neglect. Neon signs flickered erratically, motel, diner, bar, casting sickly colors across rain-slicked streets that seemed to lead nowhere good. His phone buzzed. Another missed call from the mainland. Silas let it ring, watching the screen's glow reflect off the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. A souvenir from his last case, the one that had nearly broken him. The department brass thought this assignment would be therapeutic. A simple investigation on a remote island. What they didn't know was that Silas had volunteered for Raven's Reach. He'd heard the name Blackwood in the case files, and old wounds had a way of demanding attention. The first body had been found 3 days ago. Martha Henley, 62, discovered in her kitchen with her throat opened like a second smile. The second victim, Tom Ashford, had turned up yesterday in the lighthouse, arranged in a grotesque tableau that suggested the killer had taken their time. Both had worked for the Blackwood family at some point in their lives. Both had secrets. Silas walked through the narrow streets, his footsteps echoing off empty storefronts. A few locals peered through curtained windows, their faces pale and suspicious. He'd seen that look before, the expression of people living with collective guilt, nursing shared secrets that festered in the dark. The Blackwood mansion loomed at the island's highest point, a Gothic monstrosity that had been abandoned for 20 years. Local legend claimed old Vincent Blackwood had murdered his entire family before disappearing, but the bodies were never found. Silas knew better. He'd been the rookie cop who'd first investigated those disappearances 2 decades ago, before the case was mysteriously closed and the files sealed. At the island's only diner, Silas ordered coffee that tasted like regret and questioned the handful of remaining residents. Their stories were carefully rehearsed, but fear leaked through the cracks. They spoke of Vincent Blackwood in whispers, of debts unpaid and favors owed, of children who'd gone missing over the years, and strangers who'd arrived on the island and were never seen again. "You should leave while you still can," warned Eleanor Paxton, the diner's owner, her hands shaking as she refilled his cup. Some secrets are better left buried. But Silas had spent 20 years carrying the weight of his own secrets, and running had never solved anything. He'd come to Raven's Reach because he'd recognized the killer's signature, the precise cuts, the theatrical positioning of the bodies. It was the same methodology used in the Blackwood family murders, down to the smallest detail. As night fell, Silas found himself at the lighthouse where Tom Ashford had died. The beam swept across the churning waters below, and in its rotating light, he saw movement in the mansion's supposedly empty windows. Someone was still living in the Blackwood house. Someone who knew he was coming. The mansion's front door hung open, creaking in the wind like a mouth trying to speak. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of moonlight, and family portraits watched from their frames with eyes that seemed to follow his movement. Silas climbed a grand staircase, each step groaning under his weight, his service weapon drawn but somehow inadequate against the weight of history pressing down around him. In the master bedroom, he found what he'd been looking for. Vincent Blackwood himself, now in his 70s, but still recognizable despite the wild gray hair and hollow cheeks. The man sat in a wingback chair facing the window, staring out at the island he'd never left. "I wondered when you'd come back, Detective Crane," Vincent said without turning around. "You were the only one who got close to the truth 20 years ago, before they made you stop looking. You killed your family, Silas stated, keeping his gun trained on the old man's back. And now you're killing everyone who helped cover it up. Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. My family, my dear boy, I saved my family. From themselves, from this poisoned place, from the things they'd done. He finally turned, revealing eyes that had seen too much and reflected nothing. Martha Henley helped dispose of the evidence. Tom Ashford falsified the autopsy reports. They all had blood on their hands, just as you do. The accusation hit Silas like a physical blow. 20 years ago, he'd been ordered to stop investigating, to accept the official story that the Blackwoods had left the island. He'd obeyed, even though every instinct screamed that Vincent had murdered them all. The promotion that followed had felt like payment for his silence. Where are the bodies? Silas demanded. Everywhere, Vincent whispered. In the walls, under the floorboards, scattered across the island like seeds. This place is built on bones, detective. My family's bones, and so many others. The island demanded sacrifices, and I gave them freely. The old man's confession should have brought satisfaction, but Silas felt only the hollow ache of justice delayed too long. As he read Vincent his rights, he understood that arresting one broken old man wouldn't cleanse Raven's Reach of its accumulated sins. The corruption ran too deep, had infected too many people for too many years. The ferry wouldn't return until morning. So Silas spent the night in the island's single jail cell with his prisoner, listening to Vincent ramble about the voices in the walls and the debts that could never be fully paid. By dawn, the old man had talked himself into a complete confession, providing locations for 17 different burial sites across the island. When the authorities arrived to process the crime scenes and take Vincent into custody, Silas stood on the dock, watching Raven's Reach fade into morning mist. He'd solved the case, but the victory felt Pyrrhic. The island's survivors would scatter to the mainland, carrying their secrets with them like viruses, waiting to infect new hosts. His phone rang as the ferry pulled away from the dock. The caller ID showed his captain's number, probably with news of his next assignment. Silas let it go to voicemail. He had reports to write, testimony to give, and a 20-year-old case to finally close. But he also had a growing certainty that Raven's Reach wasn't finished with him yet. As the island disappeared behind them, Silas caught sight of smoke rising from the mansion's windows. Locals claimed it was just morning mist, but he knew better. Some fires never truly die. They just wait in the darkness, feeding on secrets and shame, growing stronger with each passing year. The ferry's engine hummed steadily, carrying him toward the mainland and whatever came next. But part of Detective Silas Crane would always remain on Raven's Reach, trapped in that crumbling mansion with the ghosts of the Blackwood family and the weight of justice that had come far too late to matter. Behind them, the island settled back into its patient vigil, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to disturb its buried secrets. And in the spaces between the waves and the wind, something that might have been laughter echoed across the water, promising that this story was far from over. Peste,